Hi Riftbounders, Shrimp here, and I'm going to tell you all about how Irelia Fervent works and all of her interactions.
The dance begins!
Irelia Fervent costs 5 energy and 0 power to play, and she has 4 might. Her ability reads, when you choose or ready me, give me +1 might this turn. The important thing to note here is that doesn't say once per turn, so every time that you target or ready Irelia Fervent, she will get a +1 might bonus.
It's over 9,000!
I'm sure it goes without saying, but you is the operative word here, so that means that if your enemy targets or chooses Irelia, she won't get a +1 might bonus. And it also means that in a 2v2 setting, your ally also can't activate the effect. For the sake of ease, imagine Irelia's ability in terms of the chain. When you activate an effect that chooses Irelia, her ability is triggered and will be added onto the chain, meaning that it will be resolved before the effect that chose her. This will be important for a couple of reasons later, but let's get into it. This is actually one of the few times in Riftbound where we get to start chronologically, so let's explain all of the times that Irelia will gain a +1 might bonus and why. If Irelia Fervent was exhausted going into the start of your turn, readying her in the awakening phase does give her +1 might. Now the new mechanic that comes along with Irelia in Spiritforged is equipment. When you have an equipment in your base, you can pay a power of the same cost to attach it to a unit you control. The equipment doesn't explicitly state as much, but it is considered choosing the unit that you attach it to. So that means when you put your Guardian Angel or your Boots of Swiftness or any other equipment on Irelia Fervent, she gets a +1 might bonus each time, in addition to the boost that the equipment already gives. In a typical Irelia deck, alongside equipment you'll be running a number of empowering spells like On Guard, Discipline, and her signature spell Defy Dance. As with equipment, when you choose Irelia Fervent with any of these, she will get +1 might because you choose her with the spells. If you use a spell with the new repeat mechanic, such as Feral Strength, if you choose Irelia both times, her ability will proc for both choices, meaning that she can get an insane +6 from this spell alone. But that's not even the neat part. When you choose Irelia Fervent with an empowering spell, using Feral Strength as an example, her ability gets added to the chain immediately, on top of Feral Strength. Repeated. So even if your opponent reacts with Defy to counter Feral Strength, you'll still get that +1 and the other +1 from having chosen Irelia Fervent twice. It's not only empowering spells that trigger Irelia Fervent though, any kind of targeting will make the ability work. For spells there's movement like Fight or Flight, Flash and Emperor's Divide, and then there's general use spells like Block and Stand United, and yes, giving her a buff will activate her ability. Then funny things like Rune Prison also work, which would stun Irelia, but her total might would be 1 higher, so that might keep her alive? Okay, maybe don't do that. For gear, the Siren and Heart of Dark Ice have been popular choices in China, as they both activate Irelia Fervent in addition to their effects. Svelsungr doesn't have its own interaction outside of equipping to Irelia, but as it copies the abilities of the unit it's attached to, it effectively gives Irelia Fervent +2 might every time she's targeted instead of +1. Of course, these rules apply to units as well, so Tide Turner, Ribbon Dancer, Fae Porter, White Flame Protector, and Azir Ascendant, which all target a friendly unit, would activate Irelia Fervent's ability, just to name a few.
It is my time.
And then there's battlefields. If you're attacked on Reaver's Row, retreating Irelia Fervent would give her +1 might, but keep in mind that Draven would win a combat if you're against him. Fortified Position would also give Irelia +1 might if you choose to give her the shield too. Now, the last two in the Calm Chaos domains I want to talk about are the Legend itself, Irelia Blade Dancer, and Ride the Wind, because they're both unique compared to other effects. First off, Irelia Blade Dancer reads, when you choose a unit, you may exhaust me and spend 1 power to ready it. Let's make this totally clear. It's an optional trigger that can be activated once its condition has been met, but it does not choose. So, Irelia Fervent would get +1 for being readied, but is not being chosen by the Legend, as she was already chosen for the trigger. On the other hand though, Ride the Wind specifically moves the unit and then readies them, which means Irelia Fervent gets +1 for being chosen to move and another +1 for being readied. Please remember, if Irelia is already ready, Ride the Wind cannot ready her. Is ready even a word anymore? She'd only get the +1 for choosing her is the point. So make sure that your turn ordering is correct. An interesting consideration is effects in which your opponent makes you choose, for example, Cull the Weak. Each player kills one of their units. The important part here is that you both choose the unit, so if you choose Irelia Fervent, she gets the +1 might, because you're choosing, not your opponent. And then she's killed. Now, if you have Guardian Angel or Zhonya's Hourglass, she'll live, still have the +1, and therefore be eligible for a Ride the Wind into a battlefield, where she'd then be at +3 to contest in the showdown. Quickly, let's mention a few other interesting cards from different domains, in case you run Irelia Fervent elsewhere than her legend. With the same colours, Yasuo Unforgiven and his signature spell Last Breath would both proc Irelia, so there's some stuff you could do there if you like the Windslinger. In body, Challenge is quite cool, because from the rules we've already established, Irelia Fervent would gain +1 and then deal her might to an opponent. If Irelia Fervent has a buff to spend, Overt Operation would give her +1 for readying her, but as it buffs all other friendly units, it doesn't choose her, so only the initial +1. Strike Down would give Irelia Fervent +1 for choosing her, so you would deal an extra damage with the ability, at the cost of detaching an equipment from her afterwards. So, Jax, Yi, and Lee Sin players rejoice? I don't know. Mind has a myriad minus might and damage spells, which would technically activate Irelia Fervent, but that's pretty sus. On the other hand, you can make Irelia a mech with Experimental Hexblade, and then Bubblebot could activate her ability. So if someone wants to cook in Mechia, I guess that's cool. Finally, Order doesn't really offer Irelia Fervent much benefit. The most interesting interaction would be Death Grip, and Irelia Fervent would gain +1 for choosing her, so you could either give another unit extra might, or receive an extra might if she's getting the benefit of the spell. Fiora Worthy also works to ready Irelia, but it's only relevant if you attach a gear on her on the turn that you play her, as she would become mighty every awakening phase when she's readied anyway, so you can't really do any cool re-readies with it. There is one card that has a unique interaction though. For anyone playing Azir or Leona, if for some reason you decide you want to run Baited Hook in that deck, first of all let him cook, but here's an interesting thing. First off, no, if you use Baited Hook and find Irelia Fervent, she won't get +1 because you choose her to play from the 5 cards you looked at. The ability would trigger before she gets played, so she just won't get the +1 might. But what if you kill Irelia Fervent with Baited Hook? Then there's a unique interaction. Typically, once you start resolving Baited Hook, nothing else that was added to the chain can actually happen until you've fully resolved Baited Hook. That's because killing a unit is not a cost, it's part of the resolution. The cost is exhausting Baited Hook, paying 1 energy, and paying 1 power, and then the effect, beginning with killing a unit, resolves. For example, if you kill Unsung Hero, the death knell won't resolve until Baited Hook is completely resolved first. So you'll look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose a unit with 1 more might than Unsung Hero was when you killed it, play that card, and only then draw 2 cards from the death knell effect. Irelia Fervent is different because her effect is when you choose me, therefore her ability gets added to the chain as Baited Hook chooses her but before it resolves and kills her. So Irelia Fervent gains +1 might from her ability and then Baited Hook resolves to kill her, allowing you to play a unit 1 stronger than you otherwise could have. Still with me? Okay, good. Let me explain what doesn't work for Irelia Fervent then. There are 2 things that are probably obvious, but I'll be thorough and say them anyway. First off, moving Irelia Fervent isn't choosing her to move, it's just moving her, so there's no +1 might bonus there. The second is more about avoiding the confusion of wording. In Riftbound, you refers to the card's controller, not the current player in focus. So if your enemy targets Irelia Fervent with a spell, let's say Stupefy, Irelia won't get a +1 might, because your opponent is not her controller and is not considered you in this interaction. So unfortunately you can't say, this says you and you hit her with a spell and therefore when you target her she got +1. That's not how that works, I'm afraid. I know you knew that, but now that it's out of the way, let's talk about some more interesting cases. The core of the Irelia decks we've seen are Guardian Angel and Zhonya's Hourglass, which activate when a unit dies to be killed instead. These do not choose the unit they save, they change the result, and thus do not give Irelia Fervent +1 when they happen. Similarly to Irelia Blade Dancer, these gears detect that a condition has been met, a unit, in this case Irelia, died, and the trigger changes the result. In this case Zhonya's is destroyed instead. This is called a replacement effect. Another gear that doesn't interact with Irelia Fervent is Mask of Foresight, which reads, when a unit attacks or defends alone, give it +1 might. As with the previous example and Irelia Blade Dancer, Mask of Foresight confirms that its condition has been met and the entity has triggered the condition and thus gains the effect. But it's not chosen. Don't forget though that if you use Irelia Fervent to attack or defend alone more than once in a turn, Mask of Foresight will stack its effect, unlike for example Master Yi Legend. Not So Fast is a new counter effect introduced in Spiritforged. It counters an enemy spell or ability that targets a friendly unit or gear. Again, just for the sake of full clarity, if you use Not So Fast, you are not targeting Irelia Fervent and preventing an effect on her. You are countering the previous spell or ability in the chain, so she won't gain +1 might from using it. Spells and abilities that affect an area or group, such as friendly units for example, do not choose Irelia, so they don't activate her ability. That means that neither Jana, Tarek, or Darius Executioner would activate the effect. Spirit's Refuge would give Irelia Fervent +1 if you choose to give her the buff, but the deflect that's granted to all friendly buffed units doesn't choose anyone specifically, so that part of the gear won't activate Irelia's effect. Earlier on I mentioned that giving Irelia a buff counts as choosing her and thus triggers her ability, so what about the effects that spend a buff like Monastery of Harana or Set Brawler? Well, as you might have guessed, they don't trigger Irelia Fervent, because you choose the buff to spend, not the unit whose buff will be spent. Okay, now let's get into why the order in which Irelia Fervent activates is important. Remember, when the ability is triggered, it gets added to the chain and thus resolves before the effect that triggered it. Last Rites, Soul Gorger, and the Harrowing allow you to play a unit directly from your trash. Technically you're choosing Irelia Fervent, but since the ability would happen first and then she would be played, she does not gain +1 might because she was not active when the ability happened. Now let's say your opponent controls an Irelia Fervent and you want to play Possession. The ordering is important here again, because the ability happens before, not after. So at the moment you choose to take control of Irelia Fervent, she's not controlled by you until Possession resolves, so Irelia Fervent's ability doesn't trigger. Switcheroo does work, but I've included it here because it may not be ideal. When you choose Irelia Fervent to switch might with an enemy unit, she does gain the +1 might bonus and only then swaps might. So this could be the difference between winning or losing if your opponent plays a spell like Punch First. In this example, when we use Switcheroo on Irelia Fervent and Set Brawler, Irelia's might would go from 6 to 7 and then would switch with Set, moving it to 12 and putting her within range of Punch First. That's why you don't typically see Irelia's running Switcheroo, though it is possible. As for other domains, there's mostly nothing interesting. For instance, Dazzling Aurora doesn't choose a unit, it simply plays the first one that comes up, and Soraka doesn't choose the unit she heals, and Blade Flurry targets the battlefield, not the units it deals damage to, so these are templates that you can base your judgments off of for other cards. Irelia Fervent takes advantage of the cheap buffs available in the Calm domain to swing massive might advantages on both attack and defense, and she doesn't necessarily need a huge energy pool to keep momentum. Listen, I know what you're thinking. Irelia Fervent costs 5 energy. I could play second when I win the dice roll and I get to play Irelia on my second turn. I strongly recommend that you do not do that. It's absolutely fine to play Irelia on your third turn, and it's even favourable compared to playing Irelia on your second turn as your opponent is about to begin their third turn, especially with things like Draven floating about right now. When you're playing Irelia into your base, really consider the domains that you're against. If you don't already have a Zhonya's Hourglass or a Guardian Angel prepared, you've got a high chance that you're putting Irelia straight into the trash when your opponent's turn starts. I would always mulligan for one of these two cards, or stack deck in the absolute worst case so that you can try and find them. Don't feel pressured to rush to get Irelia Fervent into the action and on the battlefields. Yes, on the turn you play her, you could attach an equipment and then ready her with Irelia Blade Dancer's Legend ability, but this would set you back in the long-term rune economy, and also you'll be tapped so you can't really respond on your opponent's turn, which is where Irelia's strengths lie. If your opponent has had a slow early game and you have the chance to remove their only unit of the battlefield and they don't have anything waiting in their base, this can work for a huge tempo advantage, so absolutely go for it. I'm just saying don't risk everything every time, just because you can. As you go into the mid game, if you developed 1 or 2 ways of saving Irelia, don't be afraid to simply pass your turn with all of your runes up. This gives your opponent a huge headache to deal with, as your hand can and will have any number of cheap buffs or denials for them to navigate through. It's really free for holding battlefields this way. And that's about all I have to say about Irelia Fervent. I hope you found it useful and interesting, and if there's anything else you would like to know about or you think I missed anything, please let me know down in the comments. If there's another card you would like me to cover whose interactions you find confusing or you would just like to cover all of your bases, please let me know. Otherwise, hope to see you around next time. Like and subscribe for more Riftbound.